Picture this, it's 1996. The world is suffocating under corporate politeness. Everyone's playing by the rules, smiling through gritted teeth, taking orders from bosses who wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight. Then, crash. The sound of breaking glass cuts through the bullshit like a chainsaw through silk. Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't just enter WWE, he detonated it. Before The Rock was electrifying crowds, before Cena was waving his colorful flags of hustle, Austin was cracking open cold ones and cracking skulls with equal precision. These aren't just quotes we're about to dive into. They're declarations of war, battle cries from a man who made Vince McMahon bleed, literally and figuratively. Every word that came out of Austin's mouth was a middle finger wrapped in Texas drawl. And today, we're dissecting the 5 quotes that didn't just define a character, they rewrote the DNA of rebellion itself. Quote 1. Austin 3:16 says, "I just whooped your ass." June 23, 1996. Madison Square Garden, King of the Ring Finals. Steve Austin, not yet Stone Cold, just another wrestler grinding through matches, faces Jake the Snake Roberts in what should have been a forgettable encounter. Roberts, the veteran, the born-again Christian cutting promos about biblical salvation and redemption. But here's what nobody saw coming. Austin had been seething. For months, he'd been watching pretty boys and politically correct heroes get pushed, while he, a legitimate tough guy who could work his ass off, got treated like damaged goods. His body was breaking down, his career was stalling, and WWE was trying to repackage him as the ringmaster, a character so vanilla it could have been played by a mannequin. When Austin grabbed that microphone after pinning Roberts, something primal took over. This wasn't a scripted moment. This was a man who'd been stepped on, overlooked, and underestimated finally erupting like a volcano that had been building pressure for years. Austin 3:16 says, "I just whooped your ass." You hear that, crowd? That's not just cheering, that's recognition. 15,000 people suddenly saw themselves in this beer-drinking, ass-kicking redneck, who just told the establishment to go to hell in the most direct way possible. Roberts had been preaching John 3:16, about God's love and salvation. Austin flipped it into something raw, something real. His salvation wasn't coming from above, it was coming from his own 2 fists. Within 24 hours, Austin 3:16 t-shirts were being printed, not by WWE, by fans. This quote didn't just create merchandise, it created a movement. Austin went from mid-card afterthought to the face of rebellion overnight. But here's the beautiful tragedy. This moment of pure authenticity became the template for everything that followed. Austin had opened a vein, bled truth into the microphone, and suddenly everyone wanted him to do it again and again. The corporate machine that had ignored him suddenly needed him to be angry on schedule. But that first Austin 3:16, that was lightning in a bottle, pure, unfiltered rage that couldn't be manufactured, only experienced. Quote 2, and that's the bottom line. 'Cause Stone Cold said so. This wasn't born in a single moment, it evolved like a weapon being forged in fire. By late 1996, Austin had found his voice, but he needed something to punctuate his promos, something that slammed the door on arguments before they could start. Watch those early promos again. You can see Austin searching for the perfect way to end his thoughts. He'd pause, you'd see the wheels turning, and then, like a gunslinger finding the perfect draw, he'd lean into the microphone, and that's the bottom line. 'Cause Stone Cold said so. This phrase is weaponized certainty. In a world where politicians doublespeak, where bosses hide behind corporate jargon, where everybody hedges their bets and covers their asses, Austin offered something extinct: finality. Think about your own life. How many times have you been in meetings where people talk in circles? How many times have you wanted to just cut through the bullshit and say, here's what's happening, period? Austin became the voice every frustrated person wished they could be. But here's what's devastating about this quote. It's also profoundly lonely. Because I said so is what you say when you can't trust anyone else's judgment. When you've been let down so many times that your own word becomes the only currency you'll accept. Austin wasn't just being tough. He was revealing the isolation that comes with being the only person willing to speak truth. This catchphrase became a cultural virus. Kids used it on their parents. Employees muttered it under their breath. It transcended wrestling because it gave people permission to be definitive in a world that had trained them to be apologetic. But for Austin, it became a prison. Every promo had to end with it. Fans expected it. The moment he dropped it, they'd chant it back at him. The phrase that had given him power eventually became the chain that bound him to a character he could never fully escape. Quote 3, DTA. Don't Trust Anybody, 1997. The Montreal Screwjob has just shattered the illusion that wrestling is just entertainment. Backstage, real politics are bleeding into storylines. Bret Hart is gone. Shawn Michaels is walking around like he owns the place. And Steve Austin? He's watching everyone, realizing that in this business, maybe in life, the person who stabs you in the back is usually the one standing closest to you. DTA wasn't born from a script meeting. It crawled out of Austin's paranoia, his growing understanding that WWE was a nest of vipers where loyalty was just another weapon to be used against you. Don't trust anybody is the philosophy of someone who has been betrayed. Not disappointed, betrayed. There's a difference between being let down and having someone you trusted actively work against you. Austin had experienced both, and this phrase became his armor. But look deeper. This isn't just kayfabe psychology. This was Steve Austin, the man, bleeding into Stone Cold, the character. Austin had watched WCW politics derail careers. He'd seen friends turn into enemies over contract negotiations. He'd learned that in the wrestling business, your best friend today could be the guy trying to get you fired tomorrow. DTA became Austin's survival guide, but it also became his tragedy. Because a man who can't trust anybody is a man who can never fully connect with anybody. Even his partnerships, with Mick Foley, with The Rock, carried this underlying tension. When would they turn? When would the betrayal come? Austin lived this philosophy so completely that it became indistinguishable from who he was. In real life, he struggled with relationships, with trust, with letting people get close. The character trait that made Stone Cold compelling made Steve Austin's personal life incredibly difficult. But for fans, DTA became a shield against their own disappointments. Every time someone let them down, they could channel Austin's wisdom. I should have seen this coming. DTA, quote 4, I'm gonna stomp a mud hole in ya and walk it dry. This one came from deep in Austin's Texas DNA. Growing up poor, working construction, getting into bar fights, this wasn't wrestling lingo. This was street poetry. The first time Austin said it, you could hear the authenticity dripping from every word. This was how men threatened each other in honky-tonk parking lots, how disputes got settled when words stopped working. Stomp a mud hole in ya and walk it dry is beautiful violence. It's not just about hurting someone, it's about methodology. It's about taking your time, being thorough, making sure the job gets done right. But there's something almost tender about the phrase when you break it down. Austin isn't talking about quick violence. He's talking about the kind of sustained, methodical beating that comes from deep personal grievance. This is what you say to someone who has really pissed you off, someone who deserves more than just a punch in the mouth. The poetry of it, walk it dry, shows Austin's connection to his Texas roots, to a way of speaking that turns threats into art. This wasn't just intimidation, it was craftsmanship. Every time Austin delivered this line, fans could see it happening. They could picture him in those black boots, methodically stomping someone in the corner, the crowd counting along. The phrase became synonymous with Austin's most visceral moments, the times when his rage became physical. But it also revealed Austin's relationship with violence, not as chaos, but as craft. He wasn't a wild brawler, he was a technician of ass-kicking, someone who approached brutality with the same precision other people brought to their day jobs. Quote 5, I don't give a damn what you think. This wasn't just a catchphrase. This was Austin's manifesto, usually delivered directly into the camera, aimed at Vince McMahon's face, but really intended for every authority figure who had ever tried to tell him how to live his life. Picture the moment. Austin, sweating, furious, having just delivered another ass-kicking to whoever had the misfortune of getting in his way that week. The crowd is on their feet, but Austin isn't playing to them. He's talking through them, to the suits in the back, to the corporate executives, to anyone who thought they could control him. I don't give a damn what you think is the war cry of someone who has been broken by other people's opinions and rebuilt himself from the pieces. Austin had spent years in WCW being told he wasn't charismatic enough, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't something enough. He'd been fired from WCW over the phone, over the fucking phone, like he was some entry-level employee instead of a man who'd bled for the business. This quote isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake, it's earned rebellion. It's the response of someone who finally realized that other people's approval was just another form of control, another way to keep him from becoming who he was meant to be. But here's the beautiful contradiction. Austin was saying he didn't care what people thought while performing in front of 20,000 people whose reactions literally determined his paycheck. The man who claimed not to give a damn was actually feeding off the crowd's energy, using their validation to fuel his defiance of authority. This quote became the anthem for everyone who had ever been micromanaged, belittled, or told they weren't good enough by someone in a suit. Austin wasn't just rejecting criticism, he was rejecting the system that created it. But for Austin personally, this philosophy became both liberation and limitation. A man who truly doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks is a man who becomes impossible to direct, to collaborate with, to reach. Austin's fierce independence made him a legend, and eventually made him incredibly difficult to work with when his body started breaking down and his career began winding down. Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't need pyrotechnics. He didn't need entrance ramps that cost more than most people's houses. He had three things: fists that could end conversations, beer that could wash away the taste of corporate bullshit, and words that burned through arena walls like acid through steel. These 5 quotes weren't just catchphrases, they were middle fingers in sentence form, each one a perfect summary of what it means to refuse to bow down when the world is trying to make you kneel. Austin 3:16 gave us permission to fight back. Autumn Line taught us to stop apologizing for being right. DTA warned us that betrayal always comes from those closest to us. Stomp a Mudhole showed us that sometimes violence is poetry, and I Don't Give a Damn reminded us that other people's opinions are just noise if you're strong enough to tune them out. But here's what makes Austin's legacy haunting. These weren't just character traits, they were survival mechanisms for a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the wrestling business, who had to rebuild himself from scratch using nothing but rage and beer, and an absolute refusal to stay down. Stone Cold Steve Austin became the voice of everyone who ever felt stepped on, overlooked, or underestimated. He didn't just entertain us, he validated us. He made it okay to be angry, to fight back, to refuse to smile when someone was trying to screw you over. Which Stone Cold quote still hits hardest for you? Which one makes you want to crack open a beer and give the world a stone cold stunner? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, if you don't subscribe, that's the bottom line, 'cause I said so.